Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping back into the shadows of the medieval world, not to marvel at castles or kings, but to uncover the ruthless, often bizarre rules that could end your life in an instant. The Middle Ages weren't just about knights and feasts. They were filled with strict laws, fierce punishments, and moments that seem utterly unforgiving by today's standards. So before you settle in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy what I share here, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always incredible to see this global community come together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle background whisper, and let's slowly ease into the haunting world of medieval rules that could get you killed instantly. Stepping across the town's sacred boundary after sunset, imagine yourself walking through a medieval town as dusk begins to settle. The sky softens into muted shades of blue and gray, and the cool air carries a delicate mix of scents: wood smoke from hearth fires, damp earth from the nearby fields, and the faint, lingering sweetness of drying hay. The cobblestones beneath your feet feel worn and uneven, each step echoing faintly in the growing quiet. At the edges of this town lies something invisible yet profoundly respected: the sacred boundary. Not marked by towering walls or grand gates, these limits were instead defined by subtle signs known only to the locals. Perhaps a row of weathered stones, a line of ancient trees, or a whisper of old tales passed down through generations. This boundary separated the familiar and the protected from the unknown and potentially dangerous beyond. Imagine now, as night begins its slow spread, that crossing this sacred boundary was no trivial matter. The townspeople believed the line was not just a physical edge but a spiritual one. To step beyond it after sundown, without explicit permission, was to invite suspicion, and sometimes far graver consequences. Local customs held that the boundary was a barrier against malign forces. Tales were told quietly, often around the hearth, of figures who vanished when they dared to cross after dark. These stories spoke in hushed tones about shadowy figures, believed to be witches or wrongdoers, who ignored the sacred limit and were taken by the night itself. Whether these were myths to encourage respect or warnings born from real events, the belief was strong and widespread. As the sun dipped below the horizon, watchful eyes patrolled the boundary lines. These were not soldiers or officials in the modern sense, but trusted townsfolk charged with maintaining the delicate balance between safety and chaos. Their footsteps moved steadily along the paths where the boundary was said to lie, their presence a reminder to all who lived inside the town's heart. Imagine the rhythmic sound of their patrol: soft leather boots against stone, the occasional rustle of fabric, the muted clink of small bells or metal tools. Their gaze swept the shadows and the soft folds of evening mist, ever alert for signs of those who might cross the line unlawfully. To cross the boundary was to risk more than social reprimand. It was to invite suspicion of criminal intent or dark arts, in an age when fear of the unknown shaped much of daily life. Town leaders, both secular and spiritual, held these boundaries as part of their guardianship, linking them to the community's well-being. Now, imagine standing just inside this line as the night deepens. The town feels protected, enclosed within a gentle, invisible embrace. Beyond, the world seems less certain, filled with silence broken only by the distant hoot of an owl or the rustling of trees. To the medieval mind, that silence might have been heavy with unseen watchers. In these times, such boundaries were part of the rhythm of life, a constant reminder of limits, safety, and the unseen forces believed to influence existence. For families, this meant that children were kept indoors once the day's light faded, stories told to reinforce respect for these edges. For merchants and travelers, it required awareness and caution, lest they stray unwittingly and invite trouble. Consider how this boundary influenced social life. It shaped the daily schedules of townsfolk, marking the end of commerce and the closing of public spaces. The sound of closing wooden shutters and the extinguishing of lanterns signaled the turning of the day's rhythm toward rest and safety. Within the boundary, the familiar smells of baking bread and simmering stew mingled with the cool night air. Beyond the boundary, the countryside settled into a different world. The sounds of animals in the fields faded, replaced by the whispering winds. The land, once inviting by day, took on an unfamiliar stillness that could unsettle even the most steadfast. Imagine now the few who dared to cross these boundaries after dark. Perhaps they were driven by necessity, travelers seeking shelter, messengers delivering urgent news, or outcasts wandering in search of acceptance. Their journeys carried risks beyond the physical, social exclusion, accusations, or worse. Records from various medieval towns hint at strange disappearances and whispered warnings. A figure spotted slipping past the boundary line after sunset might be pursued or questioned the following day. Sometimes, tales spoke of those who never returned, swallowed by the night or taken by forces that defied explanation. Though these stories have the quality of legend, they reflect a real social fabric woven from fear, faith, and community protection. The sacred boundary was not merely superstition but a tool to preserve order in a world where the unknown was often feared. In your mind's eye, picture the boundary as both a shield and a threshold, a marker of where one way of life ends and another, less certain one begins. It was a reminder that safety was a shared responsibility, and respect for these invisible lines was essential for communal survival. As night deepens, and the town's hearths glow faintly behind shuttered windows, the boundary stands quietly, a silent guardian of a world both known and mysterious. Imagine the gentle hush of the town settling into sleep, the rhythm of lives bound by invisible lines that shaped not just movement, but belief itself. The sacred boundary was a limit woven into daily existence, a quiet force that guided behavior and shaped the delicate balance between human life and the wider, unknowable world. And so, as you imagine yourself stepping softly away from the boundary's edge, remember that in those times, to cross was to step beyond the known, into shadows woven with both fear and reverence. Wearing forbidden colors reserved only for nobility, imagine yourself standing on a bustling medieval street, the air thick with the scent of fresh bread from nearby ovens and the earthy aroma of damp cobblestones after a morning rain. Around you, common folk and tradespeople move with purpose, their clothing a patchwork of muted colors, grays, browns, and faded greens, garments spun from coarse wool or rough linen. Yet amidst this humble palette, a deep crimson cloak catches your eye, rich and vibrant, almost glowing beneath the soft sunlight. It belongs to a nobleman passing by, his steps measured, his bearing confident. This color, this fabric, is no ordinary cloth. It is a symbol, a signifier of status, power, and privilege, reserved strictly for the upper echelons of medieval society. Throughout much of medieval Europe, sumptuary laws regulated what individuals could wear, particularly in terms of color and material. These laws were not mere fashion edicts but deliberate social tools designed to maintain the visible boundaries between classes. Deep purples, crimsons, and other rich hues were not simply colors. They were badges of nobility and clerical authority. To don such colors without the proper rank was more than a faux pas. It was a transgression against the very order of society. Sumptuary laws arose from a desire to control social behavior and appearances in a world where hierarchy was woven into the fabric of daily life. Imagine a merchant, thriving in his trade but still a commoner at heart. He may covet the look of the aristocracy, believing that wearing a vivid purple cloak could lend him an air of elevated status, opening doors and garnering respect. However, such ambitions came with risks. If caught flaunting forbidden colors, the consequences could be severe. Authorities might seize the illicit garments, publicly humiliate the offender by stripping away the unlawful finery, impose fines, or, in extreme cases, enforce harsher punishments. These measures served as warnings, reinforcing the message that the social order was to remain unchallenged. Consider the technical reasons behind such exclusivity. The dyes that produced rich purples and deep crimsons were costly and difficult to obtain. Purple dye, for example, was often made from the murex sea snail, requiring thousands of these small creatures to create just a tiny amount of dye. This rarity made purple not only expensive but also a symbol of wealth and divine favor. Thus, wearing purple was a privilege tightly controlled by nobility and the church, both of whom relied on visible distinctions to assert their authority. As you imagine the texture of these fabrics, think of how the noble's crimson cloak would differ from the merchant's coarse wool tunic. The noble's cloak might be soft, heavy, and richly embroidered, its deep hues absorbing the light in a way that seems almost alive. The merchant's garment, though functional, would feel rough against the skin, its colors subdued and practical. This contrast was a daily reminder of one's place within the social hierarchy, a constant visual rhythm that structured medieval life. The enforcement of sumptuary laws was not uniform across regions or periods, but their underlying purpose remained consistent: to keep social divisions clear and enforce conformity. Officials known as magistrates or sheriffs would patrol markets and public gatherings, vigilant for any who dared to cross these sartorial lines. Punishments varied, often influenced by local customs or the severity of the offense. Public shaming was common, designed to reinforce community awareness and deter others. Imagine a merchant, stripped of his forbidden cloak in the town square, standing exposed before neighbors, his fall from perceived status as tangible as the fabric taken from his shoulders. These laws extended beyond color alone. Materials such as silk or fine velvet, jewelry, and even the number of embellishments on clothing were regulated. Each element functioned as a visual code, instantly readable by those familiar with the social rules. By controlling these symbols, the elite ensured that status was not just inherited but visibly affirmed in every public encounter. At the same time, it is important to understand the everyday perspective of those subject to these rules. For many common folk, clothing was primarily about utility and survival. Garments were patched and mended repeatedly, dyed in colors that would hide dirt and wear. The notion of wearing vibrant, costly colors would have seemed frivolous or even dangerous. Yet, beneath the surface of strict regulations, there were moments of subtle resistance and aspiration. Some artisans and merchants might seek to acquire second-hand garments of finer quality or experiment with less forbidden colors that hinted at prestige without attracting severe attention. Others might embellish their clothing modestly, balancing the desire for personal expression with the imperative of obedience. The church played a unique role in these distinctions. Clergy, too, were permitted to wear certain colors as signs of their spiritual office. The deep violet of a bishop's robe, for example, marked both religious authority and proximity to the divine. This added a layer of sacred symbolism to the visual language of clothing, intertwining earthly hierarchy with spiritual order. Over time, the rigidity of sumptuary laws fluctuated, sometimes easing with changing political climates or economic pressures. Yet the core function remained: to safeguard an established social order that was visible and palpable in every garment worn. Imagine how this shaped daily life, where identity and belonging were encoded not just in speech or behavior, but in the very colors that cloaked one's body. As you reflect on these layers of meaning, consider the psychological weight carried by the simple act of choosing what to wear. Clothing became a form of communication, a language of fabric and hue, speaking volumes about power, wealth, and place. The risks of miscommunication were tangible. To wear the forbidden crimson or purple was to challenge authority, to blur lines that society had drawn in bold, deliberate strokes. In a world without mass media or digital connection, these visual codes were vital. They allowed immediate recognition of rank and role, simplifying complex social interactions. They maintained a rhythm to medieval life, where order and predictability were paramount amidst an often unpredictable world. So, imagine yourself once more on that rain-slicked cobblestone street, watching the nobleman's cloak ripple gently in the breeze. The deep crimson absorbs the light, radiating quiet confidence and the assurance of inherited privilege. Nearby, the merchant adjusts his plain tunic, aware of his place and the boundaries he must not cross. The colors they wear speak clearly, weaving an invisible yet unbreakable thread through the rhythm of their lives. In this way, sumptuary laws did more than dictate fashion. They enforced a social harmony, a delicate balance maintained through the silent language of color and cloth. And while the laws could be harsh, even unforgiving, they reveal much about a society where identity was as much a matter of what you wore as who you were. Placing an unblessed hand upon a holy relic, imagine yourself standing quietly in the middle of a medieval town square on a cool morning. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and freshly trodden stone, the soft murmur of gathered townsfolk mingling with the distant toll of a church bell. Today is a day like no other, for the holy relic, a precious, revered object believed to be a direct conduit to the divine, is being carried through the streets. Wrapped in layers of ornate cloth, gilded with silver and gold, the relic is the center of a solemn procession. Its bearers move with reverent care, guarded by clergy and nobles alike, their faces composed yet filled with a quiet awe. Holy relics in medieval Europe were more than just objects. They were living embodiments of sacred power, tangible connections to saints, martyrs, or even Christ himself. These relics, ranging from fragments of bones to pieces of cloth, were housed in elaborately crafted reliquaries, often adorned with jewels, and carefully preserved in churches and cathedrals. The faithful believed that touching or being near these relics could bring blessings, healings, or divine favor. At the same time, the power attributed to these objects demanded strict rules about who could approach or handle them, and under what circumstances. The rhythm of daily life in the Middle Ages was punctuated by such religious events: processions, feast days, pilgrimages, each reinforcing the social and spiritual order. Imagine the townspeople gathering to witness the passing of the relic, whispering prayers, and bowing their heads. The air carries the faint aroma of incense, blending with the earthy smells of worn leather and wooden carts, grounding this ethereal moment in the tangible world. Yet, amidst this reverence, there was an unspoken boundary, a sacred line that few dared cross. To place a hand upon a holy relic without blessing or permission was more than a breach of etiquette. It was considered sacrilege. The relic was seen as an object infused with divine presence, and only the consecrated, usually priests or specially appointed guardians, were allowed direct contact. To the medieval mind, an unblessed touch was akin to touching the divine without protection or preparation, a violation that could provoke heavenly wrath. There is a recorded tale of an illiterate pilgrim, a simple soul driven by curiosity and devotion, who, during a procession, reached out to touch one such relic. His intentions were innocent, born of awe rather than defiance. But the consequences were swift and severe. Witnesses claimed that his unauthorized touch disrupted the sanctity of the relic's journey. The ecclesiastical authorities saw this act as an affront to the divine order, a transgression that could not be ignored. He was seized, condemned as an offender against heaven itself, and faced a grim sentence. The story reflects the complex interplay of faith, law, and social control that shaped medieval religious life. In those times, laws regarding sacred objects were deeply intertwined with notions of spiritual and communal well-being. Religious authorities wielded significant power, enforcing rules that maintained not only the sanctity of relics but also the social hierarchy. Punishments for sacrilege could range from penance to public humiliation, fines, or even death, depending on the severity of the offense and local customs. The idea was clear: the relic was a living extension of the divine, and any disrespect threatened the entire community's favor with the heavens. Consider the tactile nature of medieval devotion. Pilgrims would often seek physical contact with relics or shrines, believing such contact could transfer divine grace. Pilgrimage routes developed around famous relics like the bones of saints or fragments of the true cross, attracting multitudes seeking miracles. This practice fostered a delicate balance between accessibility and protection. Relics had to be available enough to inspire faith and attract pilgrims, yet protected enough to preserve their sacred power. The careful stewardship of relics extended to their physical handling. Priests and custodians underwent specific rituals before touching these objects, including blessings and prayers to prepare themselves and the relic for contact. This preparation was believed necessary to shield both the relic and the person from spiritual harm. The concept was that the relic was not a mere object but a vessel of holy power that could be disturbed or desecrated by improper handling. Imagine the sensation for the pilgrim who dared to touch a relic without blessing. For him, it might have been a brief, trembling contact filled with hope or wonder. For the observers, it was a shock, a disruption of the solemn order, a moment when sacred and profane collided. The tension that followed was palpable as onlookers exchanged nervous glances, awaiting the judgment of the authorities. The punishment he faced was a reflection not only of religious law but of the social realities of the time. Medieval communities were tightly knit and heavily dependent on shared beliefs for cohesion. To offend against the sacred was to threaten that unity. The severity of punishment served as both retribution and deterrent, reinforcing boundaries that preserved the collective spiritual and social fabric. It's important to see this episode in the broader context of medieval life. While the consequences were harsh, they were part of a world where divine favor was believed to be an immediate and powerful force influencing health, harvests, and survival. The daily lives of people were filled with rituals and precautions designed to maintain this favor, from prayers at dawn to carefully observed feast days. Within this framework, relics played a unique role. They were symbols of hope, markers of identity, and sources of comfort for many. The processions, ceremonies, and the careful handling of these objects were more than tradition. They were lived expressions of faith and communal belonging. The relics, with their rich gold and silver casings, gleamed under the sun or flickering torchlight, their presence a silent reminder of the invisible world beyond. Over centuries, many relics accrued complex layers of meaning, becoming focal points for art, architecture, and politics. Kings and nobles sought their protection and blessing, while common folk saw them as tangible connections to the divine. The care and control surrounding relics reveal much about medieval spirituality's practical and social dimensions. Reflect on the pilgrim's story not as a mere act of defiance, but as a moment where human curiosity and faith intersected with rigid structures. His fate, though tragic, speaks to the profound seriousness with which medieval society regarded the sacred. It also invites contemplation on how belief systems shape behavior, law, and community in ways that can seem distant or foreign to us today. As the procession passed on, the relic returned safely to its shrine, its power intact, its mystery preserved. The town resumed its quiet rhythm, the echoes of the day lingering like a soft chant beneath the surface of ordinary life. Imagine yourself stepping back from that scene, the scent of incense still faint in the air, the shimmer of gold retreating into shadow, and the gentle murmur of prayers continuing in the hearts of those who believed. In this way, the story of the unblessed hand upon a holy relic offers more than a historical episode. It provides a window into a world where the sacred and the everyday were deeply entwined, where the divine could be felt in the touch of an object, and where the boundaries of faith shaped not only belief but the very laws that governed life. Imagine yourself in that world for a moment, caught between awe and caution, curiosity and reverence, and the steady pulse of a community held together by the unseen threads of holiness. Drawing a weapon inside the town gates without cause, imagine yourself standing before the towering gates of a medieval town, massive wooden doors reinforced with iron bands, set into thick stone walls that have withstood centuries of weather and conflict. The air carries the faint scent of burning wood from hearths beyond, mingled with the earthy aroma of trampled dirt and the distant murmur of a bustling market. The gates themselves represent more than just an entryway. They symbolize a boundary between safety and chaos, law and disorder, the known world and the unpredictable beyond. Within these walls, life follows a rhythm tempered by the ever-present awareness of security. Townspeople go about their daily tasks, merchants arranging their wares, children chasing each other through narrow lanes, the occasional clang of a blacksmith hammering out tools and horseshoes. Yet beneath this ordinary bustle lies a rigid code of conduct, enforced not only by law but by the collective vigilance of the community. Among these rules, one stands particularly strict. Drawing a weapon inside the town gates without just cause was a grave offense, often punishable by death. This rule was not an arbitrary decree but emerged from a practical necessity. Imagine the narrowness of medieval streets, crowded with people, animals, carts, and goods. The sudden flashing of steel, the threat of violence, would disrupt this delicate balance, risking injury, fear, and the breakdown of order. Furthermore, these walls, while formidable, were not impregnable. A sword drawn inside the town was a challenge to peace itself, a spark that could ignite unrest and endanger everyone within. Historical charters from across medieval Europe frequently codified this prohibition. The texts, often formal and terse, declared that any man who unsheathed his sword or dagger inside the fortified gates, except in defense of the town, committed a capital crime. This meant swift and public justice. Imagine, then, the tension in a crowded square if an argument escalated to a hand resting on a sword hilt. That simple motion was enough to invite scrutiny from watchful eyes, neighbors, town guards, and magistrates alike. It was understood that such an act could escalate quickly into violence, and so it was met not with leniency but with severe deterrence. Consider a typical scenario. Two men quarrel over a merchant's debt, voices rising, faces flushing with anger. The crowd's murmurs grow uneasy. One hand drifts toward a belt, fingers closing around the leather scabbard. The townsfolk hold their breath. The local constable steps forward, his expression calm but unyielding. Without ceremony, the offender is seized, paraded before the magistrate, and sentenced according to the town's laws. The punishment was not only for the individual but for the community's preservation, a warning carved in the memory of all who witnessed it. The execution, often public and deliberate, served as a somber reminder. Its setting was usually near the gate or in the central square, places where the message could not be missed. The sounds of the marketplace paused momentarily as the rhythm of daily life faltered, the scent of the earth and smoke mingling with an undercurrent of solemnity. Afterward, the town returned to its steady cadence, but the gravity of the law lingered, woven into the fabric of everyday existence. Yet this rule's strictness also reveals the delicate nature of medieval urban life. Within the walls, people sought refuge from the dangers of the outside world, raiders, bandits, and rival factions lurking beyond the horizon. The gates were both shield and symbol, representing the community's shared commitment to order and safety. Drawing a weapon without cause inside was a betrayal of this pact. Interestingly, the social context adds further layers. While the law applied universally in principle, enforcement could vary according to status. Nobles and knights, often bearing weapons as a mark of rank, were expected to exercise restraint and often carried themselves with a decorum that discouraged such transgressions. Common townsfolk, on the other hand, were held to strict standards. A merchant or laborer reaching for a blade in anger was seen not only as a threat but as a challenge to the social hierarchy and the fragile peace that sustained the town. Imagine the texture of the moment when a dispute threatened to cross this boundary. The metallic gleam of a sword catching sunlight, the taut muscles of a man restraining himself, the wary glances of passers-by stepping back. The town's watchful presence was a constant, an invisible hand guiding behavior and diffusing tensions before they ignited. Beyond the immediate danger, the prohibition also served a psychological function. It fostered a collective confidence, a sense that inside the gates, life followed rules, that disputes were settled by words, markets, and councils rather than blades. This intangible sense of order was vital to the community's survival and prosperity. Archaeological evidence supports this cultural reality. Excavations near medieval gates often reveal layers of compacted earth, worn smooth by countless footsteps, suggesting that these thresholds were spaces of both daily routine and heightened significance. Nearby, public squares with stones polished by generations of gatherings hint at where justice might have been pronounced, where the community bore witness to the consequences of breaching such laws. The tactile sensation of the cold, rough stone walls surrounding these gates contrasts with the warmth of the crowded interiors, where wooden stalls and textiles soften the environment. Sounds carry differently here: the sharp clang of a dropped coin, the hurried footsteps of a guard, the murmur of voices. This sensory landscape shaped behavior, encouraging caution and restraint. As you imagine yourself stepping through those gates, feeling the change in atmosphere, the subtle shift in sound and space, you begin to understand the invisible boundaries that governed medieval towns. The prohibition against drawing weapons inside the gates was more than law. It was a social contract, a safeguard woven into daily life to maintain a delicate peace. This rule reflects the broader medieval worldview, where personal honor and communal stability existed in constant tension. The sword was a symbol of power and protection but also of danger and disorder. Its use was governed not only by laws but by shared understandings of responsibility and consequence. In sum, the prohibition against drawing a weapon within town gates without cause was a critical element of medieval urban life. It maintained peace, upheld social order, and preserved the town as a sanctuary amid a turbulent world. Its enforcement was strict, its consequences grave, but it was also a silent promise that within these walls, a measure of safety endured. So as you close your eyes and envision the stones, the iron bands, the worn pathways, remember that these physical boundaries were mirrored by social ones, etched into the rhythm of the town's life. And within that rhythm, the simple act of keeping a sword sheathed carried a profound weight, one that shaped the lives of all who called the town their home. Breaking the silence mandate during holy vigils, imagine yourself walking through the quiet streets of a medieval town, the air heavy with the soft glow of flickering lanterns and the distant chiming of church bells. It is a night unlike most, one marked by a sacred vigil observed by the entire community. The rhythm of their lives slows to a near halt as the town succumbs to an enforced silence. This silence is not merely a social courtesy or a moment of pause. It is a mandate etched deeply into the fabric of their spiritual and communal existence. On certain holy nights, towns across medieval Europe declared silence by ordinance, often enforced with unwavering strictness. Speaking, even in hushed whispers, was seen as a transgression against the sacred mysteries being honored. These nights were filled with ritual and reverence, processions winding through cobblestone streets, the faint scent of incense drifting through open windows, and the soft, steady murmur of prayers, spoken only when allowed. Imagine the communal breath held in quiet anticipation, a fragile hush that could be shattered by the slightest word. The reasons behind this strict silence were rooted deeply in medieval spirituality. The sacred vigils marked moments when the boundary between the earthly and the divine was thought to thin, when God's presence was nearer and the mysteries of faith more tangible. Speaking aloud, especially without invitation, was considered a form of disrespect, an intrusion upon the divine hush that surrounded these holy times. This was not just a matter of etiquette but a social and religious boundary carefully maintained, a way to express collective devotion and humility. Imagine a baker's apprentice during one such vigil, standing near the heavy oak door of the parish church, his breath visible in the chill night air. In the quiet, he mutters prayers, perhaps to calm his own restless mind or to find comfort in the sacred words. But the sound of his voice, though soft, draws attention. To some, it sounds like a disruption, an incitement to unrest, or even a mockery of the solemnity of the moment. In that society, breaking the mandated silence could be met with severe punishment. The apprentice might be reprimanded harshly, publicly corrected, or worse, punished with the severity that the town's ordinances prescribed. These silent nights were as much about social control as spiritual devotion. The enforcement of silence created a shared experience that bound the community together but also reinforced the power of the church and town authorities. The quiet served as a reminder that in these sacred hours, the individual's voice was subdued in favor of the collective reverence. The silence was a boundary, both physical and psychological, signaling submission to the divine order and the community's shared values. Beyond the immediate atmosphere, there was also a sensory layering to these vigils that made the silence so profound. The darkened streets were damp with the scent of autumn leaves and burning tallow candles. The soft footfalls of robed clergy and townsfolk formed a delicate rhythm on the stones. The flicker of candlelight cast long shadows, dancing gently on the rough walls of timber-framed houses. All these subtle sensations contributed to the sacred ambience, the silence weaving into the night like a tangible presence. Historical records occasionally hint at the tension such silence could provoke. People naturally seek to communicate. To break silence with comfort or curiosity is a human impulse. Yet here, in this context, even a whisper could be misunderstood as defiance or impiety. In some towns, officials patrolled the streets during vigils, their eyes alert for those who might break the silence, whether out of nervousness, excitement, or mere forgetfulness. The fear of punishment was a powerful deterrent, but it also added an undercurrent of unease to the vigil's stillness. It is worth considering how such enforced silence contrasted with the daily life of these townspeople. Their days were filled with the lively sounds of market calls, the clang of blacksmiths' hammers, the chatter of neighbors, and the laughter of children. Life was noisy and bustling, a constant struggle of survival and social exchange. the silence of the Holy Vigil was a marked departure, a deliberate withdrawal from the everyday. It was a moment when the usual clamor ceased, replaced by an enveloping quietude that encouraged reflection and awe. This contrast between everyday noise and sacred silence is a reminder of how societies structure time and space to hold meaning. In these moments of quiet, the townspeople were invited to step outside the rhythm of their usual lives and enter a shared spiritual experience. The silence itself became a form of communication, a way to express devotion without words. Yet it was also fragile and easily disturbed, a delicate balance maintained by both faith and fear. You might imagine the baker's apprentice again, now sitting in his humble chamber later that night. The silence has fallen away, replaced by the muted sounds of others returning from the vigil. Perhaps he reflects on the weight of that enforced silence, on how even a whispered prayer carried the risk of punishment. His thoughts may drift between reverence and caution, caught in the tension between personal devotion and public order. Across centuries, these practices reveal much about medieval life, the intertwining of religious belief, communal norms, and authority. They show how silence, often overlooked in our noisy modern world, held profound power and meaning. It was both a gift and a constraint, a moment of peace and a test of obedience. In the quiet that follows, imagine the soft creak of wooden shutters closing, the lingering fragrance of burning wax, and the distant echo of a final bell tolling into the night. The town settles back into its usual rhythms, the silence lifted but not forgotten. It remains, for those who lived it, a memory etched in stillness, a silence that spoke volumes without a single word. Such is the paradox of the breaking the silence mandate during holy vigils. A strict, almost breathless quiet that framed a world of unseen reverence, social order, and the human desire to both speak and listen. And in that quiet, the lives of ordinary people, like the baker's apprentice, unfolded, marked by faith, fear, and the enduring rhythm of their days. Lighting a lantern without permission after curfew bells, imagine yourself standing in a narrow, dimly lit street of a medieval town, just as the evening draws in its long, soft shadows. The sun has fully dipped below the horizon, and the cool air carries the subtle sense of soot from chimneys, the faint tang of damp stone, and the distant aroma of cooling bread from ovens long since extinguished. Around you, the houses have closed their shutters, and the murmur of daily life settles into a gentle hush. In the town square, a heavy bell tolls, a deep, resonant sound that rolls slowly across rooftops and winding alleys. This is the curfew bell, a sound both familiar and solemn, marking the transition from the busyness of day to the guarded quiet of night. Its tolls echo like a measured heartbeat, steady and unyielding. This bell carries weight far beyond its sound. It is the town's signal. All fires and lamps must be extinguished. Streets are to be cleared, and no new flames may be kindled without explicit permission from the watchman. This was not simply a practical rule to prevent accidental fires, though fire was always a serious threat in these closely packed wooden towns. It was also a measure steeped in social control and deep suspicion. Imagine the soft flicker of candlelight or the warm glow of a lantern as more than just a source of comfort. In the dark, a lone light becomes a beacon, visible, conspicuous, and sometimes threatening. In the eyes of the town's authorities, a flame burning past curfew suggested gathering, plotting, or secret meetings in shadowed corners. A flame unapproved could signal conspiracy or rebellion, whispered fears that had tangible consequences. Now, picture a small, modest home near the town's edge, its walls thick with age and wear. Inside, a widow tends her sick child. The child's breathing is shallow, and the chill of night makes the room colder still. The widow, driven by concern and maternal instinct, quietly takes a small lantern and ignites its flame, careful not to draw attention beyond her door. The lantern's light casts gentle patterns on the rough plaster walls, a soft halo that eases the darkness but also risks drawing unwanted eyes. Imagine the quiet crackle of the wick, the faint warmth it offers, and the fragile safety it provides against the encroaching night. But this simple act, born of necessity and love, was enough to draw suspicion. The watchman's rounds were vigilant, and reports of unauthorized lights quickly reached the ears of town officials. The widow's lantern became a symbol, transformed in the harsh light of law into evidence of defiance. The next day, under the stern gaze of town elders and officials, she was accused of plotting rebellion. Her reason, her desperation, lost in a world where light after curfew was a breach of order, a sign of danger. Imagine the silence that followed such accusations. A silence filled with the weight of fear, the murmur of neighbors questioning loyalties, and the slow unraveling of trust. In a society where security was fragile and the memory of unrest lingered, even the smallest deviation could tip the balance toward suspicion. This story reflects a time when the control of light was more than a fire hazard. It was a mechanism of power, a way to shape behavior and assert dominance. The curfew bell and its accompanying rules reminded all inhabitants of the boundaries within which they must live, where even the flame of compassion had to be measured against the fear of disorder. Picture the watchmen themselves, cloaked in heavy garments, lanterns swinging at their sides, their eyes scanning windows and doorways for forbidden glimmers. Their steps were deliberate, the rhythm of their patrol a steady drumbeat against the town's quiet night. They held the authority to judge and enforce, their presence a living reminder that the night belonged not to the individual, but to the collective order. And so, as the town slumbered under the watchful gaze of its guardians, the rules around fire and light shaped the very fabric of daily existence. For the widow and her child, the cost of a flickering lantern was more than a warning. It was a harsh lesson in the delicate balance between survival and suspicion. Imagine yourself stepping away from this scene, carrying with you the quiet understanding of a world where the smallest actions were bound by laws unseen but deeply felt. A world where even the tender light of a lantern after curfew could become a signal of defiance in a night governed by fear and control. Failing to bow before the procession of the Corpus Christi, imagine yourself on a quiet medieval street, the air faintly scented with blooming linden and warmed by a soft sunlight filtering through narrow alleys. From a distance, a slow, measured rhythm begins to fill the space. A procession is approaching. This is no ordinary gathering but the solemn passage of the Corpus Christi, a ritual deeply embedded in medieval faith and life. The streets seem to hold their breath, and every passerby prepares to show reverence. In this moment, the smallest gesture can speak volumes. A bow of the head, a lowered posture, the uncovering of one's head. These signs of devotion are expected without question, a shared language of respect binding the community together. The Corpus Christi procession was one of the most important religious observances of medieval Europe. It celebrated the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, the consecrated host believed to be the true body of Christ. Carried with great care and honor, often in an ornate monstrance glittering with gold and jewels, the host was the center of devotion and awe. As the procession wound through towns and villages, accompanied by the chant of priests and the scent of incense, it transformed the everyday streets into sacred ground. Imagine the scene in vivid detail, villagers in their best garments lining the cobblestones, heads bowed and hands clasped. The rhythmic footfalls of monks in sandals, the flickering of candlelight held aloft, the soft rustle of robes and the murmured prayers mingling with birdsong. Every participant is aware of their place in this solemn moment, a collective act of faith and submission. To fail to bow, to stand rigidly upright, or to keep one's head covered during such a procession was not a minor social misstep. It was interpreted as a deliberate rejection of faith, an affront to the divine. In medieval society, where church and state were tightly intertwined, religious observance was inseparable from loyalty and social order. Acts of perceived disrespect could be read as dangerous dissent, threatening the fragile fabric of community cohesion. Consider the experience of a traveler unfamiliar with these customs, a merchant from a distant land, perhaps, or a wandering pilgrim. As the procession nears, he stands still, head uncovered and body upright, puzzled by the solemnity surrounding him. His gaze lingers on the glittering monstrance, and he senses the intensity of the moment but does not grasp the unspoken rules. To him, the ritual is foreign, its language and expectations unclear. Yet the community around him sees this posture not as ignorance but as defiance. Such misunderstandings could carry grave consequences. Historical records tell of individuals who, unaware of local customs or unable to conform, were subjected to severe punishment, even death. Imagine the weight of such a moment. The traveler, frozen in confusion, suddenly marked as an outsider, his body a statement against the sacred order. The crowd's murmurs grow tense, authorities step forward. The boundary between ignorance and rebellion blurs dangerously. The harshness of the penalty reflects the seriousness with which religious rituals were regarded. In a world where divine favor was believed to directly impact health, harvests, and survival, maintaining proper respect was essential. To offend the church's sacred presence was to risk not only personal safety but the well-being of the entire community. The procession was a living expression of faith and identity, a collective heartbeat that demanded unity. Yet beyond the severity, there is a subtle texture to these customs, a shared rhythm of daily life. Imagine villagers practicing these acts repeatedly, their movements almost instinctive, a dance passed down through generations. The uncovering of heads, a sign of humility, and the bowing of bodies become natural, woven into the fabric of their days as surely as tending fields or lighting hearths. This ritual respect also created a powerful sense of belonging. To bow before the procession was to affirm one's place within the spiritual and social community. It was a silent affirmation that, despite hardships and divisions, all were united under a common faith and order. The act was both deeply personal and universally understood, a moment where individual identity merged with collective belief. The traveler's tragic fate stands as a stark reminder of the weight carried by such gestures. His story invites us to reflect on the fragile boundaries between inclusion and exclusion, between knowledge and ignorance, between faith and perceived rejection. It also illustrates how medieval life was governed not only by laws written in books but by customs lived daily, customs that shaped identities, maintained order, and sometimes demanded the ultimate price for nonconformity. As the procession fades into the distance, leaving behind the lingering scent of incense and whispered prayers, the street slowly returns to its usual rhythm. Life moves forward, the unseen threads of ritual and reverence continuing to weave through the everyday. Imagine yourself stepping softly away, carrying with you the weight of that solemn moment. A reminder that in medieval times, respect was not merely courteous, it was a cornerstone of existence itself. Trespassing into a nobility's orchard in harvest season, imagine yourself on a quiet country lane during the waning days of summer. The sun leans low, casting long shadows through the boughs of apple and pear trees that stand in neat, fruitful rows. The air is heavy with the sweet, ripe scent of fruit, mingled with the faint aroma of earth warmed by the afternoon sun. Nearby, a grand manor house rests, its stone walls weathered but proud, and its orchard stretches out like a treasured patchwork quilt of color and promise. In medieval and early modern times, orchards were more than pleasant gardens, they were vital sources of wealth and sustenance. The fruit they bore, apples, pears, cherries, and plums, was a valuable commodity. Harvested carefully and often stored for winter months, this produce supported the livelihoods of noble households, funded local economies, and symbolized the prosperity and status of the landowners. The orchards were meticulously maintained, pruned, and protected, standing as both a source of pleasure and a marker of privilege. Imagine the rhythms of the orchard during harvest season. The laborers and servants move among the trees with practiced hands, baskets in arms, gathering the heavy, sun-kissed fruit with steady efficiency. Their work is methodical, silent except for the occasional murmur of instruction or the soft thud of ripe fruit settling in wicker baskets. This season is a crucial time. Every apple and pear carries weight far beyond its taste. It represents income, barter, and survival. Yet, despite the peaceful beauty, the orchard is a place of strict boundaries and watchful eyes. The nobility zealously guarded their orchards, for any loss could ripple through their household stability. The boundaries were marked by fences, thorny hedges, or walls, and guarded by attendants or dogs. To trespass among the trees, especially during the harvest, was to invite suspicion and serious consequences. Consider a carpenter, a humble craftsman, accustomed to moving through the countryside with practical purpose. On one such day, Seeking a shortcut on his way home, he unknowingly steps through the orchard's boundary. Perhaps distracted or unaware of the property lines, he wanders briefly among the fruit-laden trees. To him, it might have seemed an innocent passage, a minor detour in his daily journey. But to the orchard's overseers, his presence was a threat. In those times, accusations of theft were severe and swift. The distinction between innocent trespass and deliberate pilfering was often blurred, especially when valuable goods were involved. The carpenter's unexpected presence among the trees was construed as an attempt to steal fruit, or at least to poach from noble property. Such an offense was not taken lightly. It challenged both property rights and social order. The carpenter was apprehended, brought before local authorities, and judged harshly. Despite any protestations of innocence or ignorance, the weight of evidence, his presence in the orchard, was enough to condemn him. The punishment was grim. He was hanged as a warning to others who might consider encroaching on noble lands. His fate echoed beyond his own life, a cautionary tale whispered along country roads and in village squares. This severe response must be understood in the context of the period. Property was a critical marker of status and power. For the nobility, land was wealth, influence, and identity. Protecting their orchards was protecting their very way of life. Laws were designed to enforce these protections, and enforcement was often uncompromising. The social hierarchy depended on clear boundaries, both literal and symbolic. Imagine the emotional landscape of such a moment, the quiet orchard disrupted by fear and accusation. The carpenter's confusion and desperation, the stoic resolve of those who guarded the orchard, and the somber finality of the sentence. It is a stark reminder of how tightly knit law, property, and life were in these communities. Yet, beyond this grim episode, the orchard itself remains a place of sensory richness and daily ritual. The soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, the sticky sweetness of sap on fingers, the gentle hum of bees visiting blossoms long past, and the earthy richness of soil beneath. These details ground us in the lived experience of those who tended and protected these lands. The story also reveals the fragile balance between survival and justice in a world where mistakes could carry fatal consequences. For common folk, a single misstep could mean the difference between life and death, often regardless of intent. The carpenter's tragedy was not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern of strict enforcement that maintains social and economic structures. Consider too the social contrasts. The noble family enjoying the fruits of the orchard in sumptuous meals and celebrations, while laborers worked long hours to bring that harvest to table. Meanwhile, passers-by like the carpenter had to navigate these spaces carefully, aware that crossing an invisible line could upend their lives. Imagine yourself stepping back from this scene. The orchard returns to its quiet state, the late afternoon sun dappling through leaves, casting playful patterns on the ground. The distant sound of village life hums softly, blending with the steady rhythm of nature. The story of the carpenter lingers, a shadow beneath the boughs, a testament to the often harsh realities woven into the fabric of everyday life. In this way, the episode of trespassing into a nobility's orchard during harvest season offers more than a cautionary tale. It invites reflection on the delicate boundaries between property and person, the significance of land as a source of wealth and identity, and the human stories that unfold where these lines are crossed. Imagine yourself in that moment, feeling the weight of history pressing gently but firmly against the branches heavy with fruit, the silent witness to a world where the sweetness of apples was guarded as fiercely as life itself. Speaking ill of the town's patron saint in public, imagine yourself standing in the heart of a medieval market square, where the lively chatter of vendors blends with the rhythmic footsteps of townsfolk weaving between wooden stalls. The air is thick with the mingling scents of freshly baked bread, damp earth, and the subtle hint of incense drifting from the nearby chapel. This bustling center is more than just a place for trade. It is a stage where the town's beliefs, values, and shared reverence are expressed openly. Among these beliefs, the town's patron saint holds a unique and sacred place. This saint is more than a distant figure from scripture or legend. They are a protector, an intercessor, a symbol of hope and identity for the community. Statues, stained glass windows, and paintings depicting their miracles stand throughout the town, their images watching over every street and square. The saints' feast days bring solemn processions, feasts, and communal prayers that strengthen bonds and reaffirm the town's spiritual foundation. In this tightly woven spiritual fabric, speaking ill of the patron saint was no mere offense. It was considered an act against the town itself, an assault on the collective soul. Such slander was often equated with treason, because to undermine the saint's honor was to weaken the very spirit that held the community together. Imagine the weight of this belief pressing gently but firmly on the shoulders of every resident, a silent but constant reminder that words carried power beyond their sound. Consider the story of a woman, her hands calloused from labor in the fields, her face lined with worry. The harvest had failed, the soil unyielding despite tireless efforts. Frustration and desperation settled like a shadow over her days. One morning in the crowded market square, her voice rose above the din, not in anger, but in a raw lament. She uttered a complaint against the town's patron saint, questioning why protection seemed absent in her time of need. Her words, whispered and then carried by attentive ears, did not vanish into the bustling crowd. Instead, they rippled outward, reaching the ears of those entrusted with preserving the town's spiritual and social order. The complaint was reported, not as idle gossip, but as a serious breach, a blasphemy that threatened to unravel the faith binding the community. The trial that followed was a somber affair, conducted with gravity befitting an offense against the divine. Imagine the cold stone walls of the town hall, the hushed murmurs of townsfolk gathered outside, and the stern faces of magistrates balancing justice and piety. The woman stood accused not only of her words but of challenging the sacred trust that upheld the town's peace and prosperity. Her execution, though harsh to modern sensibilities, was understood by contemporaries as a necessary measure to protect the town's spiritual reputation. It served as a stark reminder that faith was not merely personal but communal, that the patron saint's honor was inseparable from the town's identity. The marketplace, once again, filled with the familiar sounds of daily life, yet beneath it lay a renewed sense of vigilance and solemn respect. This incident illuminates the complex interplay between religion, law, and social cohesion in medieval towns. The patron saint's role transcended spiritual guidance. They were a unifying symbol, a protector whose favor was believed essential for good harvests, health, and peace. To insult that figure was to invite not only divine wrath but social instability. Imagine the textures of this reality, the worn stones of the chapel steps where prayers were whispered, the fluttering banners bearing the saint's image during festivals, the murmured blessings crossing lips as the town navigated hardship. Within this environment, the sacred and the mundane intertwined seamlessly, each reinforcing the other. Yet this story also reveals the human side of medieval life, the fears, frustrations, and hopes of individuals living under the weight of communal expectations. The woman's words were born not of malice but of suffering, a poignant expression of the gap between faith and circumstance. In understanding this, one perceives the rhythm of medieval existence, a constant balancing act between reverence and reality, belief and hardship, community and individuality. Speaking ill of the patron saint was not simply a violation of religious law, it was a disruption of this delicate harmony. As you picture yourself in that market square, amid the scents and sounds, imagine the invisible threads that connected every person to the saint's image, the collective heartbeat of faith that steadied the town. And within that web, the fragile line between protection and peril, between sacred respect and worldly despair. Thus, the tale of speaking ill of the town's patron saint serves as a window into the profound role of faith in shaping not just hearts but laws, communities, and the very pulse of medieval life. It is a reminder that words, especially in such a time, carried weight far beyond their utterance, rippling through lives and echoing in the silent stone of the town's walls. Touching the town's leper bell without just cause, imagine yourself in a small medieval town on a quiet Sunday morning. The church bells have just finished their soft tolling, and the congregation settles into a gentle murmur, their voices low and steady as the familiar rhythm of the Mass begins. The air inside the stone church is cool and carries faint hints of beeswax candles and worn wood, mingling with the distant scent of damp earth from the surrounding fields. Outside, a different sound echoes softly through the streets, the steady, solemn ringing of a small bell, its clear tone weaving through the morning mist. This bell belongs to the town's leper, a figure both visible and invisible in the community's daily life. Lepers were often compelled to carry a bell, a sound that announced their approach and warned others to keep distance. The bell was more than a simple instrument. It was a symbol of divine segregation, a reminder of the invisible boundary drawn by both fear and faith. Its ringing marked not only physical presence but a social and spiritual divide. Imagine the rhythm of life for those afflicted with leprosy in this town. They moved slowly and carefully, often relegated to the edges of settlement, near the city gates, on the outskirts of the marketplace, or beyond the village walls. Their bells echoed through narrow alleys and open fields alike, a constant companion that both protected and isolated. The sound was at once a call for compassion and a signal to keep away. Within this delicate balance, the bell held a powerful taboo. To touch it without just cause was to break an unspoken law woven from fear, superstition, and religious authority. The bell was regarded as an instrument charged with spiritual significance, a protective talisman that kept the sacred boundaries intact. It was not simply metal and rope but a vessel of societal order. Picture a curious child, small and wide-eyed, sitting among the wooden pews during Massachusetts. The child's gaze drifts from the altar to the worn bell resting against a pillar nearby, perhaps brought in for a moment or carried by one of the attendants as part of a ritual. The child's fingers reach out, brushing lightly against the cool metal. The touch is brief, innocent, born of wonder rather than defiance. Yet this small act sends ripples through the community far greater than the child could have imagined. Whispered murmurs grow into tense silence as eyes fall upon the child. The elders exchange knowing glances. Fear and suspicion settle like a quiet fog. To touch the leper's bell without permission was more than curiosity. It was perceived as a breach of the sacred order, a transgression that invited misfortune. The consequences of such a taboo were severe. In this case, the boy's disappearance was swift and quiet. Not a public spectacle, but a solemn removal, wrapped in silence and secrecy. His absence was a somber reminder to all of the invisible but powerful boundaries that governed the town's life. The bell had spoken, not in words, but through the weight of tradition and fear. To understand this, it is important to look at the wider context of leprosy and society's response to it. Leprosy, a disease poorly understood and feared, was both a medical and moral crisis. Those afflicted were often viewed as marked by sin, physically and spiritually separated from the community. The ringing bell became both a warning and a form of control, a soundscape of isolation that kept the community safe in body and soul. Consider how this sound, the bell's steady peal, shaped daily life. For the afflicted, it was a constant companion, a reminder of exclusion. For others, it was a signal to avoid, a call to maintain distance, yet also an echo of shared humanity beneath the layers of fear. The bell's presence was woven into the town's sensory world. Its ringing mingled with the chatter of markets, the clatter of horseshoes on cobblestones, and the distant singing of church choirs. This story also reveals the fragile boundaries between innocence and transgression in medieval communities. The child's touch was not a challenge but a moment where natural curiosity met rigid social structures. The harsh response reflects a world where safety was maintained through strict rules, and where the unseen consequences of breaking those rules could be profound. Imagine the quiet moments that followed, the hushed conversations in homes, the wary glances along the streets, and the gentle prayers whispered in church pews. Life continued in its measured pace, shaped by these unseen forces that governed who could touch what, who could come close, and who must remain apart. Beyond the specific event, the leper's bell serves as a symbol of the complex intersection between disease, faith, and social order. It reminds us how sound can mark boundaries, how objects carry meanings beyond their material form, and how communities navigate fear with rituals that both protect and exclude. Imagine yourself stepping back from this scene. The church quiets as the Mass proceeds, the scent of incense rising in soft spirals toward the vaulted ceiling. Outside, the bell's gentle ringing resumes, threading through the town's waking sounds. A reminder of separation, survival, and the delicate balance held within the rhythm of daily life. In this way, the story of touching the town's leper bell without just cause is more than an isolated incident. It is a window into a world where sound marked limits, where curiosity met caution, and where the invisible lines drawn by faith and fear shaped the contours of human experience. Imagine yourself listening closely, hearing that clear, haunting tone carry across centuries, an echo of a past where every touch, every sound, bore the weight of meaning beyond what the eye could see. Interrupting the reading of the royal edict in the square, imagine yourself standing in the center of a bustling medieval town square, the cobblestones worn smooth beneath your feet from countless footsteps. The air is alive with anticipation, yet held in a quiet hush. Around you, townsfolk gather, merchants, artisans, farmers, all drawn to this public space by an event of grave importance. A herald, dressed in the bright colors of the king's court, stands atop a wooden platform, unfurling a scroll that bears the royal seal. Today, the royal edict will be read aloud, its words carrying the weight of law and the will of the sovereign. In medieval society, royal proclamations were not merely announcements. They were instruments of governance, authority, and control. When the king's messenger declared an edict, silence was demanded, an expectation rooted in respect and fear. The town's collective attention was fixed upon the speaker, understanding that these words shaped their lives. Taxes to pay, laws to obey, privileges granted or revoked. The reading was a solemn occasion, a moment when the king's voice, though distant, was made present and binding. Imagine the soundscape, the herald's clear voice projecting over the murmuring crowd, the rustling of garments as people shift to listen more closely, the occasional distant bark of a dog or clatter of a cart. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby stall mingles with the earthy scent of the square, thick with dust and stone. The atmosphere holds a quiet tension, the kind that precedes an irrevocable decree. Now, consider the predicament of a local weaver, a man accustomed to the steady rhythm of his loom but unfamiliar with the complexities of royal taxation. As the proclamation unfolds, detailing new and confusing tax amounts, questions arise within him. The figures seem unclear, perhaps unfair, but the reading is strictly a one-way communication. Speaking up is unthinkable, for the law is clear. Interrupting the reading of the royal edict is defiance, a challenge to the king's authority. Yet, driven by confusion or hope for clarity, the weaver speaks, asking a question. His voice breaks the demanded silence, echoing awkwardly across the square. The crowd falls into stunned silence. The herald's face tightens, and the guards move swiftly. To interrupt the king's word was not merely rude, it was an act of rebellion. The consequences were immediate and severe. The weaver was arrested, tried swiftly under laws designed to protect royal authority, and sentenced to execution. His fate was public, deliberate, a grim lesson etched into the collective memory. It was meant to silence others, to reinforce the untouchable nature of royal will, and to remind the townsfolk of their place beneath the crown. This episode reflects the delicate balance of power and obedience in medieval life. Royal proclamations were instruments through which kings maintained order, extracted resources, and projected control. The townspeople lived under this constant tension, aware that even small acts of perceived disobedience could carry dire consequences. Imagine, too, the sensory contrast in the square after the event, the lingering silence heavier than before, the murmur of whispered conversations as people process the stark reminder of authority. The scent of dust and bread remains, but now mingled with an unspoken caution. Life resumes its steady pulse, shaped by laws that leave little room for dissent. The story also reveals the challenges faced by common folk navigating a world of complex governance from which they were often excluded. The weaver's confusion about taxes speaks to the distance between royal decree and everyday understanding. It is a moment where personal experience clashes with institutional power. Imagine yourself stepping back from the scene, feeling the rough cobblestones beneath your feet and the weight of silence pressing softly in the air. The royal edict, carried by voice and seal, continues to shape the lives of all who hear it, a reminder of the fragile line between obedience and resistance in a world ruled by crown and law. In this way, the tale of interrupting the reading of the royal edict is more than a story of punishment. It offers a window into the rhythms of medieval authority, the social contracts that govern behavior, and the human stories caught in the spaces between power and survival. Imagine yourself among the crowd, hearing the words that command, watching the moments that warn, and sensing the ever-present tension that marked the lives of those who lived beneath the crown's watchful gaze. Entering the stone watchtower without a sentinel's escort, imagine yourself standing at the base of a tall, gray stone watchtower, its walls rising steadily toward a sky brushed with soft clouds. The air is crisp, carrying the faint scent of moss and worn limestone, mingled with the distant whisper of wind through the surrounding trees. This watchtower, sturdy and solemn, is perched on the edge of the town's outer walls, a silent guardian watching over fields, forests, and far-off horizons. In medieval times, watchtowers were crucial to the security of towns and castles. Their purpose was twofold: to observe approaching threats, whether enemy soldiers or marauding bandits, and to serve as a hub for the flow of information, rumor, and order. The sentinels stationed within were trusted eyes and ears of the community, responsible for vigilance both day and night. The tower's stone steps echoed with the measured footsteps of guards, their armor clinking softly, voices low as they exchanged reports and observations. To enter the tower without proper escort was to breach strict protocols designed to protect the community's security. Such unauthorized access was not seen as mere trespassing but was often labeled espionage, an act of betrayal that threatened the safety of all. Imagine a young scribe from the town, curious and eager, perhaps dreaming of grand adventures or a wider world. His days were usually spent bent over manuscripts, ink-stained fingers tracing words and charts. But the watchtower beckoned, a place from which one could see beyond the familiar lanes and rooftops, a vantage point for stories yet unwritten. One day, driven by innocent curiosity, he approached the tower when no sentinel was nearby and stepped inside. What followed was silence. The scribe never returned to his family or his desk. His disappearance was a stark reminder of the uncompromising nature of medieval order and the dangers of crossing boundaries, even out of wonder. The community whispered of betrayal, suspicion, and fear, and the empty chair at his home became a silent testament to the price of transgression. This story unfolds within the daily rhythms of medieval defense and social trust. The watchtower's sentinel was more than a guard. They were the embodiment of vigilance and loyalty, the community's first line against chaos. Their role was solemn and sacred, and protocols existed to preserve the integrity of their watch. Imagine the sounds and textures of this world: the rough stone beneath your fingertips, the crisp rustle of mail armor, the muted voices of sentinels exchanging watchful news. These details immerse us in a world where boundaries were both physical and symbolic, where a single misstep could ripple into tragedy. The disappearance of the young scribe reflects the tensions between curiosity and caution in a society governed by strict rules and fears of betrayal. It speaks to how knowledge and access were controlled, and how trust was guarded with the utmost seriousness. Imagine yourself stepping back from the tower, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the battlements, the soft murmur of the town settling into evening. The watchtower stands resolute, a sentinel of stone and silence, its secrets held tight against the passing centuries. In this way, the tale of entering the stone watchtower without a sentinel's escort offers more than a warning. It opens a window into the fragile balances of medieval life, the intertwining of security, trust, curiosity, and consequence. Imagine yourself there, feeling the cool stone beneath your hand, hearing the distant calls of watchmen, and sensing the quiet weight of vigilance that shaped a world where every step mattered and every boundary was fiercely guarded. Equals moving a boundary stone marking town lands. Imagine yourself walking along a quiet, sun-dappled path on the outskirts of a medieval town. The air is fresh, carrying the gentle scent of grass and wildflowers, mixed faintly with the earthy aroma of tilled soil from nearby fields. At the edge of the common land stands a simple, weathered stone, rough-hewn, gray, and unadorned, half buried in the earth. This is no ordinary rock. It is a boundary stone, a silent sentinel marking the limits of the town's lands, its presence vital to the community's sense of order and security. In medieval times, boundary stones were far more than markers on a map. They were physical manifestations of rights, privileges, and ownership, symbols of the land that sustained families, merchants, and the town as a whole. These stones defined where fields ended and commons began, where one jurisdiction ceased and another began. To move or alter them, even slightly, was to threaten the fabric of community trust and property law. Imagine the rhythm of daily life in these borderlands. Farmers tend their fields with steady hands, mindful of where their land ends and the communal or neighboring lands begin. Town officials occasionally inspect these stones to ensure they stand firm and true, guarding against encroachment. The stones are often old, worn by wind and rain, but their meaning is as clear as the day they were placed. Now, consider a farmer who notices one such boundary stone leaning precariously, perhaps due to weather or the slow passage of time. Wishing to preserve the clarity of the town's borders, he decides to prop it upright again. His intent is not to deceive or claim more land, but simply to maintain the marker's dignity and purpose. Yet this small act, born of care and practicality, will have grave consequences. In this period, moving or altering a boundary stone was considered an act of treachery against the entire community. The boundaries they marked were collective rights, safeguards ensuring fair access to land and resources. Tampering with them threatened disputes, economic loss, and the very order on which towns depended. Laws reflected this seriousness, prescribing severe penalties for those found guilty of moving markers, whether intentionally or accidentally. The farmer's well-meaning effort is discovered, and despite his explanations, he is accused of attempting to expand his land unlawfully. The community's trust is shattered, and the law moves swiftly. The punishment, harsh and unyielding, results in his execution, a sentence designed not only to punish but to serve as a stern warning. His fate outlasted any chance he had to explain or plead, becoming a somber tale carried in whispers across the fields. Imagine the silence that follows such an event. The fields continue to sway in the breeze, the boundary stones stand rigid and resolute, and life presses on with a quiet persistence. The farmer's absence leaves a void, a reminder of the unforgiving nature of law and order in a world where land was life. This episode highlights the delicate balance between individual intentions and communal regulations in medieval society. While the farmer acted out of concern for clarity and care, the community's need for clear, unquestioned boundaries overrode personal motives. The stones were not merely property markers but guardians of social cohesion. Picture, too, the sensory details of this world. The rough texture of the stone under calloused hands, the firm soil crumbling slightly as the farmer adjusted the marker, the distant murmur of town voices discussing justice and order. These elements form a backdrop to a story where the natural human impulse to help collided with the rigid structures of law. The story also offers insight into how medieval communities navigated property, trust, and punishment. The severity of consequences for boundary tampering underscores the essential role of land rights in economic survival and social identity. In a world without modern surveying tools or legal clarity, these stones were the final word, a tangible truth carved in stone and earth. Imagine yourself stepping back from this scene, feeling the steady rhythm of the land underfoot, the ancient stones standing as witnesses to lives shaped by boundaries, both physical and moral. The wind carries the quiet stories of those who walked before, reminding us that even small acts can ripple through history with lasting impact. In this way, the tale of moving a boundary stone is more than a cautionary anecdote. It reveals the profound connection between land, law, and life in a community where every stone mattered, every boundary was sacred, and where order was preserved through vigilance, trust, and, at times, unforgiving justice. Imagine yourself standing there, the cool stone at your side, the weight of centuries pressing gently into the present, a quiet testament to the delicate balance of human society. Failing to cover one's head before the magistrate's bench, imagine yourself stepping into the cool, shadowed chamber where the magistrate holds court, a room heavy with the scent of aged wood and faint traces of burning tallow from the flickering candles. The stone walls, cold and unyielding, echo softly with the murmurs of gathered townsfolk and officials, each awaiting the solemn proceedings about to unfold. At the far end, the magistrate's bench rises like a throne, carved from dark oak, symbolizing the authority that governs law and order in this community. In medieval society, rituals of respect were woven into every aspect of life, none more so than the administration of justice. These rituals formed a code of behavior that reinforced hierarchy, decorum, and the sacred nature of law. Among these, the custom of covering one's head before the magistrate was a powerful gesture, either removing one's hat or pulling a hood low over the face, to signify humility, respect, and submission to the court's authority. Imagine the subtle tension in the air as individuals approach the bench. The rustle of coarse fabrics, the shuffle of boots on stone, and the faint whisper of prayers or whispered advice mingle quietly. Every gesture, every nod, carries weight. Failing to observe these rituals was interpreted as more than ignorance. It was seen as deliberate contempt, a challenge to the very foundation of social order. Consider a foreign trader arriving from distant lands, unfamiliar with the nuances of local customs and protocols. He stands before the magistrate, his hat still resting on his head, unaware that this small act could be read as insolence. His confusion is not malice, but cultural distance, a moment where one's own customs collide with another's unspoken laws. The trial proceeds with gravity, the charges serious, and the court's gaze unyielding. Despite his explanations, the trader's failure to cover his head is taken as a sign of defiance, an affront to the magistrate's dignity and authority. The verdict is harsh, swift, and final. The trader is sentenced to beheading, a punishment intended not only to penalize but to serve as a stark example to all who might disregard established order. This episode reveals much about the power of ritual in medieval justice. Law was not merely a system of rules but a theater of respect and symbolism. The smallest gesture could carry profound meaning, shaping outcomes and lives. The act of covering one's head was a language of submission, an acknowledgement of the court's sovereignty and the individual's place within a rigid social hierarchy. Imagine the sensory details surrounding this event: the chill of stone underfoot, the sharp scent of smoke from candles flickering in the drafts, the heavy gaze of officials watching closely, the murmurs of the crowd caught between curiosity and dread. These details immerse us in a world where decorum was law, and law was life. Beyond the tragedy of the trader's fate, the story speaks to the challenges of cultural encounter and misunderstanding. In a world where travel was rare and borders defined not only geography but behavior, the foreigner's misstep was a fatal breach, a reminder of how difference could be met with suspicion and severity. Imagine yourself stepping back from the magistrate's bench, the echoes of the trial fading into the quiet stone halls. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows, and the air remains heavy with the gravity of justice served. The ritual of respect, etched deep into the fabric of medieval society, continues to govern the lives of those who walk its courts. In this way, the story of failing to cover one's head before the magistrate's bench is more than a cautionary tale. It offers a window into the rhythms of power, respect, and cultural boundaries that defined medieval law. Imagine yourself there, feeling the weight of tradition pressing gently but firmly, hearing the silent language of gestures that shaped fate, and sensing the delicate balance between justice and mercy in a world where every action spoke volumes. Carrying more than one sealed letter without approval, imagine yourself on a dusty road winding through a medieval landscape, where the sun filters softly through scattered clouds, casting muted light over fields and forests. The air carries the scent of dry earth and wild herbs, mingling with the faint sounds of distant village life, the rhythmic clatter of a blacksmith's hammer, the low murmur of voices. Along this path, a man travels steadily, burdened by several small parcels, each wrapped carefully and sealed with wax, bearing the marks of distant kin. In medieval times, the carriage of letters was not a casual affair. Messengers were licensed, their roles tightly regulated by royal or local authorities to control communication, especially over long distances. Letters were more than mere messages. They were vessels of information, influence, and sometimes intrigue. Carrying multiple sealed letters without explicit approval was fraught with risk, as unauthorized correspondence was often presumed to conceal sedition or conspiracy. Imagine the rhythm of this man's journey, the steady pace of his feet on the worn path, the careful grip on his parcels, the occasional glance over his shoulder. Each sealed letter carries not only words but the weight of trust and suspicion. The network of communication in medieval society was a delicate web, where control over information meant power, and unauthorized messengers threatened that balance. As the man approaches a town gate, his burden draws the attention of the guards. Protocol demands inspection, and he is stopped and searched. The parcels are unsealed before a growing crowd, whispers spreading like wildfire. Despite his explanations that the letters are private, sent between family, doubt clouds the air. In this era, secrecy invited suspicion, and suspicion often led to accusation. The charge leveled against him is grave: treason. To carry messages not sanctioned by authorities was to undermine the social order, to conspire in shadows. The man's journey ends at the scaffold, a stark conclusion meant to warn others of the peril in crossing these invisible lines. His fate is a somber testament to the seriousness with which communication was monitored and controlled. This story unfolds within the larger tapestry of medieval governance and security. Letters could carry commands, secrets, and rebellions. They were tools in the hands of rulers and dissenters alike. Licensed messengers served as trusted conduits, their loyalty ensured through oath and oversight. Unauthorized letters threatened to unravel this fragile trust. Imagine the sensory details surrounding this episode: the rough texture of parchment, the sharp scent of sealing wax mingling with the earthy air, the low murmur of the crowd as accusations rise, the cold steel of the guards' blades resting at their sides. These details ground us in a world where the control of information was as vital as control of land or weapons. The tale also reveals the human cost of such control. The man's journey, perhaps intended to unite family across distances, is cut short by a system wary of unseen threats. His personal story becomes entwined with the broader anxieties of a society striving to maintain order amid uncertainty. Imagine yourself stepping back from this scene, the dust settling on the road, the crowd dispersing, and the quiet weight of law settling over the town. The parcels remain as silent witnesses, their secrets locked away, their messenger gone. In this way, the story of carrying more than one sealed letter without approval opens a window into the rhythms of trust, suspicion, and power that shaped medieval life. Imagine yourself there on that dusty road, feeling the weight of those parcels, hearing the cautious whispers, and sensing the delicate balance between connection and control that governed a world where words could be as dangerous as swords. Entering the churchyard when bells tolled for excommunication, imagine yourself walking along a narrow, winding path leading to the village church, the air thick with the mingled scents of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. The sky above is heavy with gray clouds, and a chill breeze stirs the leaves on ancient oaks lining the way. Suddenly, the solemn tolling of heavy bells breaks the quiet, a deep, resonant sound rolling over the rooftops and fields. These are no ordinary bells. They signal an excommunication, a powerful declaration that a soul has been cast out from the Church's grace. In medieval times, excommunication was one of the most severe spiritual penalties the Church could impose. It marked a person not only as separated from the sacraments but as socially and spiritually untouchable. When the bells tolled for excommunication, the churchyard, the hallowed ground where the dead rested, became forbidden territory. To enter it during this time was to risk contamination, suspicion, and condemnation by association. Imagine the rhythm of life abruptly interrupted by this tolling. The market stalls quiet, children stop their play, and even the birds fall silent as if sensing the weight of the moment. The community pulls inward, aware that the ringing bells carry both warning and grief. The condemned soul stands alone, their fate etched not only in law but in the collective memory. Now picture a cobbler, a humble craftsman, making his way through the village with a basket of repaired shoes slung over his shoulder. Unaware of the excommunication bells, he steps into the churchyard, perhaps taking a shortcut or seeking a moment of quiet among the gravestones. His presence is noticed, and whispers ripple through the gathered townsfolk. In that world, proximity to the excommunicated was itself a crime, a sign of sympathy or complicity with one shunned by both God and man. The cobbler's innocent passage is swiftly interpreted as aiding the outcast, a dangerous association that threatens the spiritual and social order. Accused and brought before the magistrate, his fate is sealed, not through evidence of wrongdoing, but through the heavy weight of suspicion. The cobbler is put to death, his life ending as a stark warning to others about the boundaries that must not be crossed. His story is a somber reflection of how fear and faith intertwine to enforce exclusion, where silence and separation were tools of control as much as spiritual judgment. Consider the sensory world in which this unfolded, the cold stone of the gravestones underfoot, the heavy tolling of bells vibrating through the air, the hushed conversations and quickened heartbeats of villagers caught between fear and faith. These details create a vivid tableau of a society where spiritual boundaries shaped every step. Beyond the tragic fate of the cobbler, this episode reveals the profound power of ritual and symbol in medieval life. The excommunication bell was not merely sound but a force that could reshape communities, enforce isolation, and redefine belonging. The churchyard, a place of rest and reverence, transformed into a space of fear and taboo. Imagine yourself stepping back from the churchyard, the last echoes of the bell fading into a heavy silence. The grave markers stand as silent witnesses to a world where spiritual judgment and social order were inseparable. Life continues around the edges, shaped by invisible lines drawn in sound and belief. In this way, the story of entering the churchyard when bells tolled for excommunication offers more than a historical footnote. It provides a glimpse into the delicate and often harsh ways that communities maintained boundaries between the living and the dead, the saved and the outcast, the accepted and the condemned. Imagine yourself there, feeling the weight of tradition pressing gently yet firmly, hearing the distant bell's solemn call, and sensing the quiet power of faith to divide as much as to unite. Removing a taper from the shrine during candle collection, imagine yourself standing in a dimly lit chapel, where shafts of pale morning light filter softly through stained glass windows, casting fractured rainbows upon ancient stone floors. The air is thick with the gentle warmth of melting wax and the faint scent of incense lingering from the night's prayers. Before you stands a small shrine, adorned with flickering candles whose flames dance in quiet homage, each taper a token of faith offered by worshippers seeking blessings, solace, or gratitude. In medieval times, shrines were not only sacred spaces but living repositories of devotion. Candles were among the most common and cherished offerings, symbols of light in darkness, a physical manifestation of prayer and hope. Each taper was considered a holy gift, consecrated by the act of giving and the sacred flame it bore. To take one without permission was to steal from the divine, a desecration that challenged the sacred trust between worshipper and God. Imagine the rhythm of daily life within the chapel. Servants and attendants move quietly among pews and altars, tending to the candles, replenishing oil, and maintaining the sanctity of the space. Their duties often extended to gathering the remnants, stubs, and spent tapers, hoping to reuse what was left in a practical, thrifty gesture. For them, these fragments were resources, not threats. Now consider a young servant tasked with collecting candle stubs for reuse. As she carefully removes a taper from the shrine to light another candle elsewhere, her intentions are practical and humble, born of necessity and economy. Yet, within the eyes of the community and the church's strict customs, her act is seen very differently, as theft, an affront to the holiness of the shrine, and a profanation of sacred gifts. The consequences for such perceived desecration were severe. The servant's punishment was swift and merciless, carried out in the quiet hours before dawn to set an example and restore order without disturbance. Her fate echoed the uncompromising belief that the divine must be protected from even the smallest acts of disrespect or misappropriation. This story unfolds amid the delicate interplay of faith, economy, and ritual in medieval religious life. The candles in the shrine were more than wax and wick. They were vessels of spiritual intention and communal devotion. Taking from them was not simply a matter of property but a breach of sacred trust. Imagine the sensory details that fill the chapel, the soft crackle of flames, the faint glow illuminating worn wooden carvings, the sticky texture of cooled wax beneath fingertips, and the hushed reverence that cloaks every movement. These details immerse us in a world where even the smallest acts carried profound meaning. Beyond the servant's tragic fate, this episode reveals how medieval communities balanced practicality and piety, where thriftiness could be mistaken for sacrilege, and where the boundaries of respect were enforced with a rigor that might seem harsh to modern eyes. Imagine yourself stepping back from the shrine as dawn breaks outside, the first light creeping softly across the floor, mingling with the fading glow of candle flames. The chapel remains a place of quiet power, where faith and fear intertwine, and where every gesture, no matter how small, echoes with significance. In this way, the tale of removing a taper from the shrine during candle collection is more than a story of punishment. It opens a window into the rhythms of devotion, respect, and communal boundaries that shaped medieval spirituality. Imagine yourself there, feeling the warmth of the flickering candles, hearing the silent prayers carried on the air, and sensing the delicate balance between sacred trust and human need in a world where every light was a gift and every shadow a warning. Kneeling on the wrong side of the sanctuary rail, imagine yourself stepping quietly into a medieval church, the air thick with the faint aroma of incense and beeswax, the cool stone floor worn smooth beneath your feet. Soft light filters through stained glass windows, casting muted colors across wooden pews and the intricate altar beyond. The sanctuary is a space carefully arranged, a sacred geography where every corner holds meaning and every boundary is meticulously observed. In medieval churches, the sanctuary rail was more than a physical divider. It was a powerful symbol of spiritual hierarchy and purity. This low barrier marked the boundary between the laity and the clergy, between the common faithful and those set apart, priests, nobles, and those deemed worthy of closer proximity to the divine during worship. The space beyond the rail was reserved for the elite, sanctified as a domain of ritual authority and reverence. Imagine the rhythm of a service unfolding, the quiet rustle of prayer books, the steady chant of the choir, the soft murmur of whispered prayers. Worshippers kneel in unison, heads bowed, hands clasped, each occupying their designated place. The order is clear, its observance a gesture of respect and understanding of one's place within the spiritual and social order. Now, consider a pilgrim, weary from a long journey and unfamiliar with local customs. Seeking solace or favor, the pilgrim kneels instinctively, choosing a spot near the altar within the sanctuary rail. To the untrained eye, it is a place of devotion. To the community, it is an intrusion, a breach of sacred protocol. Kneeling on the wrong side is not merely a mistake but a transgression of sanctity, a crossing of boundaries that were fiercely guarded. The reaction is swift and unmistakable. Parishioners and clergy alike turn their gaze toward the pilgrim. Whispers rise, and hands reach out to pull the intruder away. The act of kneeling becomes a moment fraught with tension, a physical symbol of order challenged and restored. The pilgrim is escorted from the sanctuary, a quiet but firm reminder of the divisions that govern even sacred spaces. This episode reflects the deeply ingrained structures of medieval spirituality and social hierarchy. Ritual spaces were carefully divided to maintain purity, authority, and order. Each boundary carried meaning, reinforcing the roles and ranks that shaped daily life and worship. The sanctuary rail was both barrier and boundary, a tangible expression of the unseen lines that defined community. Imagine the sensory details of the moment, the smoothness of the wooden rail beneath hands, the soft rustle of robes as clergy move purposefully, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows on stone walls. These elements ground us in a world where space and gesture were laden with significance. Beyond the immediate incident, the story reveals the challenges faced by travelers and outsiders navigating unfamiliar customs. The pilgrim's mistake was innocent yet costly, a reminder of how tradition and expectation could be as formidable as physical obstacles. Imagine yourself stepping back from the sanctuary, the sounds of the service resuming with measured calm, the pilgrim's absence a quiet echo in the sacred space. The church remains a place of devotion and division, where every gesture is a dialogue between faith, respect, and the social order. In this way, the the tale of kneeling on the wrong side of the sanctuary rail offers more than a simple reprimand. It opens a window into the rhythms of reverence, hierarchy, and belonging that shaped medieval worship. Imagine yourself there, feeling the weight of history pressing gently in the air, hearing the soft prayers, and sensing the delicate balance of sacred space where every step and posture carried profound meaning. Crossing the bridge after the trumpet of closure, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a sturdy stone bridge, its arches spanning a slow, winding river that threads through a medieval town. The evening sky is painted in soft hues of lavender and amber, and a cool breeze carries the faint scent of damp earth and ripening grain from nearby fields. As the day slips toward dusk, the sounds of the town begin to fade into quiet murmurs, interrupted only by the sharp, clear blast of a trumpet echoing across the water. In medieval times, such trumpet calls were not mere fanfare but crucial signals marking the closure of gates, bridges, and city boundaries. Each evening, a designated note would announce the end of the day's open passage, enforcing curfews and security measures. Crossing a bridge after the trumpet had sounded was not simply a matter of tardiness. It was viewed as an act of infiltration or a desperate flight from justice, raising suspicions of wrongdoing or rebellion. Imagine the rhythm of daily life winding down with the setting sun. Merchants pack away their stalls, laborers finish their tasks, and townsfolk begin to retreat behind walls and gates. The trumpet's call punctuates this transition, a solemn reminder that the town is now closed to outsiders and that all must submit to the authority of the watch. Now, picture a miller, a man accustomed to the steady thrum of his mill and the scent of freshly ground grain. After a long day, he hurries home, unaware that the trumpet has already sounded. Perhaps slowed by weariness or distracted by the day's labors, he steps onto the bridge just as the final note fades into the evening air. What follows is swift and unforgiving. Town guards seize the miller, accusing him of crossing the boundary unlawfully. His explanations fall on deaf ears, for rules are strict and security paramount. In the eyes of the law, his late crossing is tantamount to defiance or evasion. The miller is arrested, tried, and condemned, a punishment meant both to uphold order and to warn others of the consequences of disregard. This story unfolds within the delicate balance of medieval law enforcement and communal safety. Curfews and closures were vital tools to protect towns from external threats, control movement, and maintain social order. The trumpet's call was a clear, audible boundary, a line drawn in sound and silence. Imagine the sensory world surrounding this event. The firm grip of leather gloves as guards seize the miller, the rough texture of the cobblestones underfoot, the fading glow of lanterns casting long shadows, and the hushed whispers of onlookers caught between fear and fascination. These details bring to life a world where time and space were governed as strictly as laws and customs. Beyond the miller's fate, the story speaks to the challenges of living under such rigid systems, where a moment's delay could transform an ordinary man into a criminal. It reveals how communities balanced freedom and security, trust and suspicion, in a world marked by invisible lines and audible signals. Imagine yourself stepping back from the bridge, the river flowing quietly beneath, the last light of day melting into night. The trumpet's echo lingers, a sound both warning and boundary, reminding all who hear it of the fragile order that held the town together. In this way, the tale of crossing the bridge after the trumpet of closure offers more than a cautionary episode. It provides a window into the rhythms of medieval life where sound marked limits, where time was law, and where every crossing bore the weight of consequence. Imagine yourself there, feeling the cool evening air, hearing the fading trumpet call, and sensing the profound balance between freedom and control that shaped the lives of those who lived beneath the watchful gaze of their town. Failing to declare one's purpose at the gatehouse, imagine yourself standing before the sturdy wooden gates of a medieval town, their heavy beams reinforced with iron and worn smooth by countless hands. The air is cool and tinged with the scent of smoke from distant hearths, mingling with the faint aroma of damp stone and freshly turned earth. Ahead, the gatehouse looms, its narrow windows and watchful sentinels a constant reminder that entry is granted only under strict scrutiny. In this world, every traveler seeking passage through the gate was required to declare their purpose clearly and without hesitation. This ritual was not mere formality but a vital security measure. Towns were vulnerable to threats, thieves, spies, or rebels, and the gatehouse served as the first line of defense, a place where trust was tested and allegiance confirmed. Imagine the rhythm of life here. Guards exchange sharp glances, their voices low but firm as they challenge each newcomer. The steady creak of wooden gates, the shuffle of feet on cobblestones, and the distant murmur of townsfolk create a backdrop of watchfulness. In this charged atmosphere, hesitation was dangerous. Uncertainty or silence was often interpreted as guilt. Now, picture a weary tinker, a craftsman traveling from village to village, his hands calloused and his clothes worn from long days on the road. Exhausted and disoriented, he reaches the gatehouse and is questioned. His mind fogged by fatigue, his answers come slowly, stumbling over words and details. To the sentinels, his hesitation is suspicion. To the town's law, it is proof of conspiracy. The tinker is seized without mercy, accused of plotting against the town or harboring secret designs. Despite his protests and explanations, the machinery of suspicion grinds forward. The trial is brief, the judgment severe. The tinker's life ends on the scaffold, a grim reminder that vigilance was ruthless and mercy scarce. This story unfolds against the backdrop of medieval fears and the imperative of security. Towns were small, communities tightly bound, and the cost of infiltration high. Rules governing entry and interrogation were strict, designed to protect what was fragile and precious. Imagine the sensory details surrounding this moment: the rough texture of the gatehouse timber beneath your fingertips, the cold steel of a sentinel's sword hanging nearby, the sharp bark of questions cutting through the evening air, and the stifled gasps of the gathered crowd as judgment is pronounced. These details ground us in a world where words could save or condemn. Beyond the tinker's tragic fate, the story reveals the harsh realities of suspicion and control. It speaks to how exhaustion, fear, and miscommunication could become fatal in a society where trust was measured by clarity and confidence. Imagine yourself stepping back from the gatehouse, the heavy doors closing behind, the chill of night settling over the town. The silence that follows is thick with unspoken warnings, a reminder that in this world, the price of uncertainty was often far too high. In this way, the tale of failing to declare one's purpose at the gatehouse is more than a warning. It offers insight into the rhythms of medieval life shaped by suspicion, law, and survival. Imagine yourself there, feeling the weight of watchful eyes, hearing the urgent demands, and sensing the delicate balance between welcome and threat that governed every crossing into the town's guarded heart.